With Pokemon Sword and Shield being out for about a month now, everybody has managed to experience the game entirely for what it is. Many enjoyed it, many didn't. I personally am on the fence, as whilst there is a lot that I enjoyed about the game, there's also just as much material that left a very sour note in my mind. But those are for future videos of mine. In today's video though, I'm going to be talking about voice acting and argue how Sword and Shield's existence shows that future Pokemon games are very much in need of it. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TheUzigunner, and with that being said, enough of me rambling on. Let's get this show on the road, shall we? See, Pokemon has always been a franchise that throughout the majority of its lifespan focused on 2D. During then, there really wasn't much this game offered in terms of overall expression from the characters until Generation 5. Despite that being what to me was the perfect time to start introducing voice acting, it wasn't necessarily much of an issue as the overall presentation for these said games didn't make the lack of this element a glaring issue. Whilst the full-on transition to 3D in the generations after made the no voice acting issue much more evident in certain aspects of the game, which I personally believe played a factor to the endless cutscenes complaints in Generation 7, most, including myself, still found it bearable. Then out comes Pokemon Sword and Shield, the first ever new generation of Pokemon on a home or rather hybrid console. It goes without saying that despite the obvious issues with the game, Pokemon Sword and Shield is undisputedly the most expressive mainline Pokemon game to this date. The characters show much more liveliness and personality with their mannerisms than any Pokemon game ever created, from your interactions with them to the many special cutscenes that play as you fight them. Hell, even their mouth movements are so advanced which make it look like they're legitimately saying everything that's being said on the text box. So when you combine all of that together, the conclusion can be made from a strictly aesthetical perspective. This cast of characters possesses the most personality amongst all the generations. Yes, even this abomination. Yet, despite taking so many initiatives to bring life to their games, Game Freak chose to not put any voice acting in their games. And because of that, we got scenes like this. No, seriously, who the hell thought that this was a good idea? Because of no voices being there, these cutscenes, which showcase these characters in all their glory, end up coming off as rather awkward. This is further worsened by the fact that whenever these special cutscenes happen for these characters, the lines progress automatically. This is just my personal experience, and I'm not necessarily too sure if this speaks for other players as well, but there were many phases throughout the game where I was forced to choose between either seeing the unique animations of the characters and miss out on the certain bits of the dialogue and vice versa. And this is coming from me, who is used to watching anime in sub rather than dub, aka the only way to watch anime. Yes, I have a body pillow, and I'm proud of it. No, actually, don't judge me, please. Finally, this is also the generation where Game Freak went all in with making sure that the character's way of speaking matches the region's culture, from Hop to especially Marnie. As a result, I'd argue that having a set voice is especially essential as it in a way completes the unique characterization that Game Freak is setting for these characters. But through not following through with it in the end, the intended effect of these efforts isn't fully lost per se, but rather heavily neutered. Despite all of that, that's not why I'm making this video in the first place. The thing that really irked me behind this whole ordeal was Game Freak's justification behind not implementing voice acting in this generation. When asked about why there was no voice acting in a recent interview, Shigeru Omori, who is the director of Pokemon Sword and Shield, basically said that from a practical standpoint, it would be too troublesome to carry out and organize the voice acting for the 9 separate languages that this game offers. I mean, damn. It's not like other games, let alone JRPGs, have gone around this issue by having 2 voice languages while offering the rest as text box options, right? Nope. Not at all. As shown just now, there arguably is no need for having to dub all these languages to begin with. I would argue that offering two voice languages, that is English and Japanese, is much better than offering no languages at all, because even to those that don't have a strong grasp of these aforementioned languages, they don't need to understand what the speaker is saying to form an association with the voice and the character that they represent. Why do you think there's a constant debate between Japanese dub and English dub for anime viewers? Because to many that choose to watch the Japanese dub, despite being well versed in the English language mind you, they prioritize the overall delivery of that said voice much more. As a result, I genuinely don't think taking the initiative will hurt the games in any shape or fashion, especially when these other franchises have already followed this approach and are benefiting from it at the end of the day. Whilst the character and Pokemon names may be different for these two languages, I personally don't see an issue with it being set in such a way where if you play the game in Japanese dub but with English subtitles, the Japanese names for the human characters will still show up in the text box, whilst the English Pokemon names will still show up on the battle screen despite the trainer yelling out their Japanese names. Regardless, my point is that whilst Omori's reasoning may appear to be logical, it completely disregards what the other franchises have done to work around it. So unless Omori literally hasn't played any other games, which I like to think isn't the case, him giving this reasoning almost comes off to me as if he's deflecting and the true reason is something else completely, which I won't bother to make further assumptions on. The second part of his reasoning, however, essentially states that they personally find it better for the players to develop their own personalized images while playing the games and reading the text of the characters. Now, while I personally find this opinion to be rather backdated, I understand that it is his opinion, and by no means am I saying that he has to go against what his personal wishes are, since this is a part of his creation and game design. However, as I mentioned before, this is the generation where everything that isn't the battle system is the most expressive it's ever been. Well, except for the story, but that's for another day. No other generation remotely comes close to it, and that's a fact. But when you choose to take such an approach and not follow through with giving the cast voices, the overall presentation ends up getting negatively affected from it, as I've already mentioned earlier on. This wasn't an issue before, as the majority of the generations were in 2D and the characters lacked proper expressiveness. Now, that is no longer the case, leading to the mess of the scene with peers. As a result, it didn't inspire me to come up with my own voices for these characters, like I did for the past generations. Instead, it only served to make the experience rather empty and hampered the enjoyability. It showed to me and many other players that share my opinion that the more expressive a game gets with each new installment, the more of a necessity the inclusion of voice acting becomes. Finally, it is true that Pokemon is a JRPG, meaning that there are a lot of lines to account for, as stated by Omori, but at the same time, there isn't necessarily any need to voice every single line, particularly from the mere NPCs you meet throughout your journey. For people like them, they could simply add in a simple grunt or two words like they do with Pokemon Masters and other games back in the day, whilst offering fully voiced dialogues for the important characters. It may seem impossible to those that haven't played like any other JRPGs in general, but keep in mind that Pokemon stories aren't a quarter, let alone a fraction, as large as them. Fire Emblem 3 Houses is a game with 4 total routes, infested with varying dialogue, all of which are fully voiced. And they are made by a company that essentially are as large as Game Freak. The only leeway I'm willing to give Pokemon over this, however, is the fact that these games actually could afford to take their time to make it all possible, especially Fire Emblem 3 Houses, which got delayed 2 times before its eventual release in July 2019. Still, the fact remains unchanged that Pokemon games aren't remotely as large as these games and never will be. And considering how Nintendo's the one in charge of assigning voice actors for their RPGs, I don't see Game Freak struggling massively at incorporating them into their game. Now that I'm done arguing about why I find these reasonings flawed, I think it's time I talk about voice acting and how through introducing them, Pokemon can solve some of their problems while introducing much more depth towards their product. So without ado, let's get into it, shall we? Through introducing voice acting into the game, Pokemon can finally come one step closer towards improving what they've been struggling with for many generations now: the storytelling. See, no matter what approach they take throughout these past few generations, there has always been a constant debate between both sides, where people such as myself want the deep story-focused campaign which Black and White exhibited, and also didn't happen to mind the approach that was taken in Sun and Moon, whilst the other side find these elements intrusive in the sense that there are too many lines for them to read and that they are tired of constantly being stopped from progressing in their journey due to a plot point. And while this is something that personally appalls me, I can understand why this would irk these said players, because some people simply don't like reading much. And there are no button prompts for them in the middle of the cutscenes for them to skip ahead if they so wish for it. Or, due to there not being any voices, they can't necessarily empathize with everything that's happening on screen and instead are just feeling rather empty. But through having a very well done voice performance from all parties, these flaws can get covered up and increase the likelihood of people being invested with the story. The power of words is strong, and from my understanding, it's even stronger when it's articulated by someone who has their ways with conveying them. In fact, allow me to demonstrate by drawing upon this certain scene from Fire Emblem Echoes involving a character called Berkut, who just lost everything that was something that he considered his birthright. This is how the scene plays out if there was no voice and you're left to imagine it. Now here's how the scene goes with actual voice acting.
It's not possible. Alm is the Emperor's true son, which makes him the rightful successor to the Imperial throne. All this time, all the effort, what has it all been for? No, it isn't true. It can't be. I refuse to believe it. Nothing but lies. Lies! 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 Lies!
Which version is better? I'll leave that for you guys to decide. My point is, through this form of delivery, I was able to feel what the characters were saying on a personal level. And judging by the other people that played the game, so did they. The same applies to Fire Emblem Three Houses, as whilst many have very much praised the game on so many fronts, the voice acting was constantly mentioned and praised about. As I said, having well done voice acting helps the player to empathize with everything that's happening on screen. From the laughing at the humor, to being sad when something heartbreaking happens, to feeling anger when a dastardly villain speaks of the horrible things that they have done with glee. But through there not being any voices, it's much more difficult to experience those feelings. And when you're going out of your way to make everything else look much more expressive and realistic, to not put any voices only ends up hurting the immersion, as I've already mentioned. And while some could try to argue that Pokemon games aren't as intense or as serious as the other JRPGs, which makes the addition of voice acting unnecessary, let's not forget about characters like Ghetsis, a psychopath who manipulated everybody simply for the sake of power, and in the sequel's Japanese version, literally orders Kyurem to impale your sorry ass with ice. Or Lusamine, a woman driven to madness due to the loss of her husband, so much so that she quite literally has a bunch of permanently frozen Pokemon in her lair. These characters offered so many classically done scenes that to those that played the game's stories, found it memorable. But if they were properly voiced, I'd wager that they would become unforgettable. It goes without saying though, that this along with the other points I made isn't a guarantee though, as it greatly depends on the execution from the voice actor itself. Otherwise, we get something like But after how hollow these cutscenes from Pokemon Sword and Shield felt due to there not being any voices, I have every reason to believe that they should introduce them for future games. Lastly, this is something that I'm speaking on a more personal note. As much of a subjective opinion as this is, Pokemon storytelling has always lacked when compared to the Dragon Quests, to the Bravely Defaults, to the Tales of series, and pretty much any other JRPGs out there. It has always stayed rather simple. You know what also had a rather simple JRPG story? Octopath Traveler. Now this is me speaking from solely my experience, but the game from start to finish is everything you'd expect from a traditional story to be. Yet, it came off to me as grand because the voice actors took the story and made the most out of it. They sold their voice lines to the maximum and made me invested. The conviction in their voices reached out to me on a personal level, and as I am remembering all of this, I can't help but think of the cutscenes involving Rose as he's conversing with Leon at the top of his tower, your rivals and gym leaders as they engage in unique dialogue while in the middle of battling you, wishing in my heart of hearts that I could hear what they had to say. While I would love for Pokemon stories to reach the level of these aforementioned franchises, it most likely never will. But despite its inadequacies, I'd say that they have very much showcased signs of absolute brilliance throughout these last 7 generations, which unfortunately never reached the level it could have. But through finally introducing voices, through finally introducing proper voices to represent these characters, which I believe are just as amazing as other JRPG favorites, they may very well end up coming off as more complete characters. At the end of the day, despite the many arguments I'm making, many still have reason to believe that future Pokemon games don't need voice acting. They have gone by just fine without them, right? So on paper, they don't need it. But neither did Final Fantasy, neither did Dragon Quest, neither did Persona, neither did Fire Emblem, and neither did Tales. But they did, and in the end, these games benefited greatly from it. And I like to think that so can Pokemon. Change is a hard thing to accept. It's natural human nature, but considering everything they say that they're trying to accomplish, maybe it's time that they stop doing things by halves. Maybe it's time that they finally start seeing things through until the very end. So yeah, that my friends concludes this video. I apologize if this ended up being rather way too long, but honestly speaking, there was a lot I wanted to say on this matter, and I hope my overall presentation made it entertaining enough for each and every single one of you. If you enjoyed this in any way, feel free to drop a like on this video and subscribe to yours truly if you want to see more of the TheUzigunner. And if you have anything to add in the comment section down below, feel free to let me know, and I will most definitely be happy to engage in discussion with each and every single one of you. Either way, my name is TheUzigunner. Thank you very much for watching. Have yourselves a glorious day, and I'll see you all on the flip side. Bye!